Hello. Today we're going to talk about motivation, and as managers, motivation will be a big chunk of your responsibilities. You need to motivate your employees. Sometimes you need to motivate your partners. So today we're going to talk about different approaches to how motivation can be achieved and what works, what doesn't work in organizations. So as usual, let me share my slides and then we're going to proceed from here. So we're going to identify several classes of motivation theories, so-called content and process motivation theories. We'll talk a little bit about reinforcement and how those different theories can be combined. And we'll end by talking about rewards and recognition, because sometimes the most powerful motivation techniques do not really cost you anything, right? So it's just what you say and how you treat your employees. So we're going to talk about that. In a general sense, the reason we pay so much attention to motivation is that it's an important component that explains the performance of your employees. Right, so we typically hire based on people's ability. We try to give them resources so that they can perform the functions that we hire them for. But really, without motivation, if they go there and are not willing to go above and beyond, it's not going to be a very productive work environment. So we want to make sure that motivation is there. And oftentimes, motivation can actually overcome lack of resources and sometimes lack of ability, even though this is a more troublesome combination, I would say. But again, if you want to see performance, if you want your company to do above average, if you want to go above and beyond, motivation is a key piece. And there's this cycle that motivation goes through to affect individual performance, right? So it all starts with the need. People need something. You want to motivate them, you have to understand their needs. So from needs, they have a motive to do something, so that encourages certain kind of behavior, which leads to consequences, which leads to their satisfaction or dissatisfaction, which feeds back into the needs that they perceive that they have, right? So if they figure out the way to satisfy those needs, if they're motivated to do what's good for them and at the same time good for your company, then that's obviously the situation you want to find yourself in. And for that, we really need to understand the needs themselves and then the process that encourages certain behaviors. Now, to understand their needs, we have to use one of the few content motivation theories that exist out there. And the most well known of them is the so called hierarchy of needs by Maslow. So that was developed in the first part of the 20th century. And the whole idea here was people sometimes refer to it as the pyramid, right? So the hierarchy of needs. The idea is that until lower level needs are satisfied, people cannot realistically think about satisfying their higher level needs. It all starts with physiological needs, right? So things like food, shelter, some basic things that individuals need to survive. Once that is taken care of, people start thinking about safety and security. Once that is covered, people actually start having social needs. They want to belong to a group, they want to have friends, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Once that is satisfied, there we talk about esteem needs. Right? So here people talk about status, they talk about professional acknowledgement, things of that nature. And then finally, when that is satisfied as well, people start going for self-actualization. Right? So this is something where they try to express themselves to realize their full potential. So here you have, like really wealthy individuals all of a sudden trying to go to Mount Everest, right? Because they want to do something that allows them to express themselves, to experience some higher plane of existence, if you will. And this sounds great, right? So I guess this whole Maslow's need hierarchy seems to be making sense. But research-wise, there's not much support for it. It turns out people may go for higher level needs even when their lower level needs are not satisfied, which kind of brings this theory on its head. And I think we all know examples like that from popular culture, right? With artists like Eminem going for self-actualization, essentially, while not really having their basic needs taken care of. Uh, this is highly inconsistent with this theory. So it's there theoretically, it's appealing. In practice, there are major challenges with that theory. It has been simplified somewhat, where the number of those levels. So Maslow talked about five. There was another guy called Alderfer, I hope I pronounce it right, that looked at existence, relatedness, and growth, which basically existence combines the safety and physiological needs. Relatedness is the same thing as a social need in Maslow's hierarchy. And then growth represents esteem and self-actualization. Uh, Not only did he combine several levels into just one level, he also suggested that needs at any level can be unmet simultaneously, right? So you may go for whatever needs motivate you, regardless of where they are in this hierarchy. So that's a major step forward. A different approach is the so-called two-factor theory, where all the factors, and remember, so here we talk about work motivation, right? Whatever motivates employees to work for a specific company and do a certain job. So here, all the factors that could potentially motivate the employee are split into two groups, right? Two factors, the so-called maintenance factors and motivators. Maintenance factors are extrinsic. They have nothing to do with the work itself, right? So here we do talk about things like your physiological need, your pay, the apartment you live, the kind of food you have, your safety, and even your social needs, right? So this exists outside of your work as such. So this is extrinsic. Intrinsic factors, the so-called motivators, they have to do with your esteem and self-actualization. They have to do with how excited you are to be doing what you do, how motivated you are really to be doing what your job implies. And the sort of non-conventional thing here is that, like typically when we think about individual satisfaction, and motivation, we may say that the person is either satisfied or dissatisfied. In this two-factor theory, satisfied and dissatisfied are not the ends of the same continuum. Individuals may be either dissatisfied or not dissatisfied when you look at the maintenance factors, right? So those extrinsic motivators, and satisfied or not satisfied when you look at intrinsic factors. So this is kind of confusing. And as you deal with that, and like in your exams and quizzes, please keep that in mind. Individuals are not found on some continuum from dissatisfied to satisfied. Those are different dimensions. Dissatisfied dimension refers to your extrinsic factors or maintenance factors. Satisfied dimension has to do with motivators or intrinsic motivations. So that is essential. And then finally, there is this thing called acquired needs theory by McClelland, which has been developed substantially after, much later than the hierarchy of needs. And what that one says is it actually does not look at extrinsic motivators much at all. It just looks at the work itself and what motivates you as an employee to perform certain tasks. And so it doesn't look at physiological or safety needs whatsoever. Instead, it identifies three specific needs: need for affiliation, which is kind of like relatedness, which is kind of like the social need in other theories, need for power. So this is similar to your status and growth and ability to have autonomy. And then need for achievement, which is probably more close to self-actualization in Maslow's terminology. So, depending on where you are, individuals, we all have all of those three needs, but the relative importance of those needs for each of us would be different. So, if you happen to have an individual who is really high on affiliation needs, right, he wants to be part of the group, that to that individual, the comfort of being around others, the peace in the collective are absolutely essential. That person will not necessarily be aspiring for power. That individual does not need to be telling others what to do. So if you want to motivate that individual, right, so that's the need you need to cater for. And obviously you have to have a pretty good idea what your individuals are like in order to motivate them properly. Uh, so those were content motivation theories. There are also process motivation theories that primarily link, they explain your individual behaviors. Right? So those were the content theories focused on needs. Process motivation theories focus more on behaviors. And the first of them is the so-called equity theory, which basically says that employees are motivated when their perceived input equals outputs. So it's the sense of equality. And several things are essential here. First of all, it's all perceptual, right? So what you put into a specific task, right? The effort you put, that, your assessment of that effort is based on your perception. What you get out of it, right? The recognition you get, the reward you get, it's also not necessarily an objective function. It is subjective. So perceptions are critical. And the thing is that those rewards should be equitable. High performance should be rewarded. So even though perceptions are here and, they do kind of color our thinking and our sense of equality, you've got to introduce some metrics to make it sort of objective, right? So this is why, um, remember previously we said that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. You've got to have some standards in place. You're going to have some measures in place. You've got to provide feedback to your employees so that they know, how they do with respect to those standards. This is how this whole thing fits into the picture. There's also the goal setting theory, which says that to really motivate employees to do certain things, you have to set difficult but achievable goals, or achievable but difficult, right? If it's too easy, people are not going to be motivated. If they know it's impossible to do, they're not going to be motivated. So you don't want to set easy goals. You don't tell employees to just, do their best, because again, that's pretty subjective. You set some difficult but achievable goals so that employees push hard to reach it. And that process itself, the process of their sort of inner growth to achieve those challenging goals is enough of a motivation to have them do the right thing, or at least so the theory would say. Then there's also this expectancy theory, which basically says that employees are motivated when they believe they can accomplish a task and the rewards are worth the effort, right? So it's the belief in themselves, it's knowing that they're going to get the reward, and it's them caring about that reward specifically. Three elements to it: expectancy, instrumentality, and balance. Expectancy basically means that, they have to believe that it's up to them, that it's in their power to do what is expected of them. Instrumentality, there should be this perceived relationship between performance and outcome. So I know about you guys, I get all sorts of spam emails, And oftentimes there is someone trying to collect some information and they say, well, fill out this questionnaire. It's only going to take you 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And then if you do that, we're going to enter your name in some sweepstakes, then you're going to be you will possibly be one of three winners of, this gift card or that gift card. I understand that, even if I can do what they ask me to do, the likelihood of actually getting the reward is negligible. So naturally, I never do those things. Or maybe, balance the value a person places on that outcome. Um, if they tell me, do this, and we're going to donate $20 to a charity of your choice or of their choice, whatever the case might be. If I don't really have a charity I care about, or if I don't care about the charity enough, I wouldn't care about doing that, right? So that reward has no meaning to me. I would not be motivated to do what they ask me to do. So obviously, you want to make sure that employers believe you'll do as you say. So again, that probably goes somewhat to the instrumentality thing, right? You have to know that if you do what the expectation is, then you really are going to get the reward. And so that basically circumscribes the process motivation theories. There's also this reinforcement theory that basically says, well, think about it as carrot and stick. What it basically says is that to really motivate people, you have to engage either carrot or stick, some punishment or some reward. And you use this reinforcement to encourage desirable behavior and discourage undesirable behavior, right? For encouraging desirable behavior, there's positive reinforcement and avoidance reinforcement. So what's positive reinforcement? It's basically, you do something right, your manager says, good job, and that motivates you. Or, maybe there's some financial reward attached to it. So basically, it's somehow compensating you or rewarding you for displaying desirable behavior. Avoidance reinforcement is where you do certain things not because you're going to be praised, but because you know that if you don't do them, there are going to be some consequences, right? So there's no punishment as such because you do things, right? You're engaged in desirable behaviors, but you engage in those behaviors out of fear of some negative reinforcement, right? So you do what's expected of you. The way you discourage undesirable behavior is, kind of similar. So one is you can just, punish an individual for doing what he or she is not supposed to be doing. And, that's really that. Extinction is kind of a reinforcement that you do to completely eliminate undesirable behavior, right? So you may withhold promotion for an individual. You can, right? So if a person engages in undesirable behaviors, you completely withhold some positive consequences that could have been there in the first place. So that's, again, the idea of this reinforcement. Reinforcement may happen on different schedules, continuous schedule and intermittent schedule. Continuous, it kind of sounds like a good idea, but in many cases it's impractical. You cannot tell every time the person does something right, good job, right? After a while, it's gonna stop to matter at all, but also just the practicality of it, like you cannot tell a person good job every time he or she comes to work on time, right? So it is silly, and you have better things to do with your own time. So a better idea is to engage in intermittent reinforcement, which again may come on different schedules, could be fixed interval or variable interval, or it could be based on ratio, right? So when we talk about intervals, talk about the time, right? So some reinforcement that happens bi-weekly or monthly or something like that. When you get your paycheck because you do what's expected of you, that would be a fixed interval schedule. When you get your, I don't know, well, some sort of benefits based on a variable interval, quarterly, or maybe when the firm, as long as it's not on a fixed schedule, right? As long as it's variable, right? So it could be sometimes quarterly, could be annual, could be just sort of random. Then that's an example of a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. And you may also reward people based on ratio, fixed ratio or variable ratio. So fixed ratio, basically, if they achieve certain level of productivity, you reward them. So you pay people for every 10 widgets that they make, right? So that would be a fixed ratio schedule. With variable ratio schedule, you may have different levels of reinforcement depending on people's productivity, right? So it could be that you do 10 widgets an hour, you're going to get this much as a compensation. You make 12, your compensation goes up not by 20%, but I don't know, by 25 or 30%. So something like that. Right? So the idea is that you can tweak that schedule of reinforcement to match what works best for your people. And the idea is that you have to really understand the people that work for you, because that is essential. Now, obviously, all of those theories can be combined. You remember that cycle that we talked about at the very beginning of the session. You have this need, then the motive, behavior, consequence, and then satisfaction and dissatisfaction. So you understand the needs with the help of content motivation theories. You understand the motives, right? How people select behavior to satisfy those needs based on process motivation theories. Then you observe the actual behavior, you implement some consequences, right? So that's the manager behavior. And this is where reinforcement theories come into play. And then from that, individuals derive satisfaction or dissatisfaction, which then informs their needs at the next cycle of that whole thing. So these theories can and should be combined if you are to be effective manager. And then finally, something that we do not really talk about much in business schools and I guess generally. So when we talk about motivation, we talk about compensation and incentive schemes and all of that. Often you get a lot more out of individuals by simply giving them praise for work well done. So it's a very powerful tool. It's a very inexpensive tool. And this is something that really encourages good corporate citizenship behavior on the part of your employees. So when you give praise to individuals, there's a certain, I guess, approach that you may want to engage. And it starts with telling the employee exactly what was done correctly. When the employee is praised, it is essential that he or she understands, why that praise is being given. So you identify the behavior that you want to see repeated. So that is important. You also tell the employee why that behavior is important, right? You inform the employee of, I guess, the inner workings of your company, the processes within your company, so that you increase the understanding of that employee. And then you stop for a moment of silence. You let this whole thing sink in. And then obviously you encourage repeat performance. So how you do that with whatever schedule of reinforcement, right? So obviously, given praises, one forms of reinforcements is up to you, and it should depend on the circumstances, but you definitely do want to encourage it. When given praise, there are two approaches that could be dealt with. One is you may just give person a compliment, the so-called ingratiation, right? So you go through all of those things, you say good job, or like maybe what you did really helped us out. We couldn't have done it without you, that kind of thing. A more cynical approach, but also the one that works, is so-called altercasting. This is where you characterize a person as certain type to encourage a desirable behavior. So the best example I can think of is, again, when raising children, you have this little boy, and then you tell him when he does something correctly, you say, good job, you're such a big boy, you do this now, you do that now, so that you characterize that person as someone that he or she will strive to be. And if that person believes that this is how you see him or her, then the desired behavior is more likely to repeat, then that person is more likely to make an effort to display the kind of behavior consistent with that characterization. So again, that's the idea, right? So that typically motivates employees, people in general, to behave in certain ways. And that's pretty much it for the motivation session. There's obviously a lot more that we can talk about. And I encourage you to read the textbook in detail. I encourage you to read more generally about motivation because as managers, this is something that you'll be doing a lot. And it's important that you guys understand it really well. So thank you. And I'll meet with you next week, virtually or whatever the case may be.